What if I told you that two engines were so devastatingly powerful that they literally ended the entire muscle car era? I'm talking about the Chevy 454 LS6 and the legendary Chrysler 426 HEMI. These weren't just engines, they were automotive weapons of mass destruction that scared Detroit so badly they killed their own golden goose. Today I'm going to reveal why these mechanical monsters were considered too dangerous to exist, and how their very existence triggered the downfall of American performance cars forever. Imagine it's 1970, and Detroit has reached the absolute peak of automotive insanity. The horsepower wars have spiraled completely out of control, and two manufacturers have just unleashed engines so brutal that they would change everything. But here's what they don't want you to know. Both General Motors and Chrysler knew these engines would be their last hurrah before government regulation destroyed the party forever. The corporate executives were in full panic mode. Insurance companies were threatening total boycotts. Safety advocates were demanding congressional hearings, and emission standards were looming like a death sentence. So what did they do? They decided to go out with the biggest bang possible, creating two engines that would become legends precisely because they were never meant to survive. Both the LS6 and the HEMI were designed as farewell gifts to performance enthusiasts, but they were also calculated risks that backfired spectacularly. These engines were so powerful that they accelerated the very regulations they were trying to beat. The manufacturers had created their own executioners, and they knew it from day one. The gentleman's agreement about horsepower limits was already crumbling, but these two engines didn't just break the rules, they obliterated them. Detroit was about to learn that there really could be too much of a good thing, and the consequences would haunt car enthusiasts for decades to come. Let me destroy everything you thought you knew about these engines with the classified numbers that Detroit tried to hide. The Chevy 454 LS6 was officially rated at 450 horsepower, but that was corporate fiction designed to fool insurance companies and regulators. Independent dyno testing revealed this monster was actually producing over 500 horsepower at the flywheel, making it one of the most underrated engines in automotive history. The Chrysler 426 HEMI was even more dishonest about its capabilities. Chrysler claimed 425 horsepower, but racing teams and private dyno operators were seeing consistent numbers above 460 horsepower. Both companies were lying through their teeth to avoid regulatory attention. But the performance numbers on the street told the real story. The LS6 featured 11.25 to 1 compression ratio that required premium fuel and produced torque figures that would bend lesser drivetrains into pretzels. We're talking about 500 pounds-feet of torque that hit like a freight train at just 3,400 RPM. The massive 454 cubic inch displacement was fed by a radical solid lifter camshaft that produced an idle so aggressive it shook the entire car. Meanwhile, the HEMI's hemispherical combustion chambers created the most efficient burn characteristics ever achieved in a production engine. The cross-ram intake manifold could gulp enough air to support 600 horsepower, while the massive exhaust valves could evacuate spent gases faster than most modern engines. The 10.25 to 1 compression ratio was conservative compared to the LS6. But the HEMI's advanced head design made every compression point count. But here's where the conspiracy gets really deep. Both engines were deliberately restricted with mild camshafts and conservative tuning. Engineering documents that surfaced years later revealed that both power plants were capable of much more extreme specifications, but corporate lawyers killed the more aggressive versions before they could reach production. Now we're getting into the real conspiracy, and what I'm about to reveal will shock you to your core. Both the LS6 and HEMI were developed with full knowledge that they would be the last of their kind. Internal memos from both companies reference these engines as final solutions and closing statements in the horsepower wars. The insurance industry had already begun implementing discriminatory policies against high-performance vehicles, but these two engines pushed them over the edge into total warfare. Companies like Allstate and State Farm began refusing coverage entirely, or charging premiums that exceeded the value of the cars themselves. The manufacturers knew this would happen, but they built the engines anyway as a form of corporate rebellion. Government regulators were circling like vultures, armed with emission standards and safety regulations that would effectively ban high-performance engines. The Clean Air Act was already in development, and automotive executives had been briefed on requirements that would make engines like the LS6 and HEMI impossible to certify. They were racing against a regulatory clock that was already counting down to zero. But here's the smoking gun that proves the conspiracy. Both engines were designed with built-in obsolescence. The LS6 was only offered for one model year in the Chevelle, while the HEMI was restricted to specific high-performance applications with limited production numbers. The manufacturers were deliberately creating scarcity to drive up demand while simultaneously preparing for their own regulatory defeat. Some industry insiders claim that both engines were originally intended to be much more powerful, with prototype versions producing over 600 horsepower. These ultimate specifications were allegedly scrapped when corporate executives realized they would trigger immediate government intervention that would destroy the entire performance car market overnight. The racetrack couldn't hide the true nature of these automotive weapons, and their domination was so complete that it terrified both competitors and regulators. In NASCAR, the 454 LS6 engines were so dominant that rule changes were implemented mid-season to control their advantage. The HEMI had already been banned from most racing series due to its unfair technological superiority. At drag strips across America, LS6-powered Chevelles were running consistent low 12-second quarter miles completely stock, while HEMI-equipped Plymouth, Cuda, and Dodge Challenger combinations were destroying everything in their path with times that seemed impossible for street cars. The performance gap between these engines and their competitors was so large that it was embarrassing other manufacturers. Professional racers from that era described these engines as having power characteristics that bordered on uncontrollable. The LS6's massive torque output could overwhelm any tire compound available at the time, while the HEMI's explosive power delivery required complete drivetrain redesigns to handle the punishment. Many racing teams actually had to detune these engines to make them manageable on the track. But here's the most damning evidence of their true capabilities. Both engines were so dominant in racing applications that they were effectively banned from competition through restrictive rule changes. The HEMI was excluded from NASCAR due to its hemispherical head design, while the LS6 faced displacement penalties that made it uncompetitive. Racing organizations were actively working to suppress these engines because they made competition meaningless. The most telling proof? Independent testing by automotive magazines of the era revealed acceleration figures that wouldn't be matched by production cars for another 2 decades. These weren't just powerful engines, they were glimpses into an automotive future that regulations would never allow to exist. The collector car market has exposed the truth about these engines that Detroit tried to bury, and the numbers are absolutely staggering. Original LS6 Chevelles are now commanding prices that exceed $500,000 at major auctions, while genuine HEMI cars regularly break the 7-figure barrier. These aren't just expensive collectibles, they're automotive artifacts that prove the incredible engineering capabilities that were deliberately suppressed. Restoration specialists who work on these engines report that the original components were manufactured to tolerances that exceed most modern racing parts. The LS6's forged internals could handle power levels that would destroy contemporary engines, while the HEMI's precision-machined combustion chambers represent metallurgy that was decades ahead of its time. The cost to properly rebuild either engine now exceeds the price of most new cars. The rarity factor tells the real story of deliberate suppression. Only about 4,000 LS6 engines were ever produced, and they were restricted to a single model year in the Chevelle. The HEMI was limited to specific high-performance applications with production numbers that were artificially constrained by corporate decision rather than manufacturing limitations. Modern engine builders who specialize in recreating these power plants admit they still struggle to match the original specifications, even with contemporary technology. The casting quality, port designs, and internal component strength were so advanced that current manufacturing methods can barely duplicate them without spending astronomical amounts of money on custom tooling. Barrett-Jackson and other premier auction houses now feature these engines as headline attractions because they represent the absolute pinnacle of American automotive engineering before corporate politics and government regulation killed innovation forever. Collectors describe owning these engines as possessing pieces of automotive history that were too powerful to survive in the real world. The LS6 and HEMI conspiracy is just the beginning of the story. And if you think what you've learned today is shocking, wait until you see what's coming next. I've uncovered classified documents about other suppressed engines that make these look like economy cars by comparison. We're talking about power plants that were locked away in corporate vaults, prototypes that were ordered destroyed, and engineering breakthroughs that were classified as threats to national security. Hit that subscribe button right now because next week I'm exposing the engine that Ford built but was forced to destroy by government order. This monster was producing over 700 horsepower in 1971, and only one prototype allegedly survived the corporate purge. The documentation I've found will blow your mind and prove that American automotive engineering was capable of achievements that would make modern supercars look pedestrian. And that's not all. I'm also investigating the international conspiracy where foreign governments allegedly pressured American manufacturers to suppress engine technology that would have made their domestic automotive industries obsolete. The paper trail leads to diplomatic channels and involves backroom deals that change the course of automotive history forever. Drop a comment below and tell me which automotive cover-up you want me to investigate next. Are you curious about the missing Pontiac Ram Air 5 program, the Buick Grand Sport engines that were too fast for their own good? Or maybe the Oldsmobile 442 power plant that was allegedly banned by the EPA before it could reach production? Your suggestions fuel my research, and trust me, there are plenty more explosive secrets waiting to be revealed. Remember, the automotive establishment and government regulators don't want you to know this information. But together, we're going to expose every conspiracy and cover-up that robbed enthusiasts of the greatest engines ever conceived. Subscribe now and join the fight against automotive censorship and regulatory oppression.